Have you ever wondered why some men seem uncomfortable around you? Why they avert their gaze, change their tone of voice, or act strangely defensive even when you haven't said a word? Jean-Paul Sartre used to say, "It doesn't matter what they did to you. What matters is what you do with what they did to you." But what if what they did to you was convince you that you're not enough? What if your insecurity isn't an accurate reflection of reality, but rather a silent agreement with a lie you accepted as truth? This video is an invitation, not to discover how to appear more attractive, but to recognize that perhaps you already are, and that what's missing isn't beauty, charisma, or presence, but the courage to embrace the freedom all of that carries. Today, we're going to explore 13 signs that you are far more attractive than you think. Signs that don't show up in the mirror, but in the silent impact you have on others, especially on men. And I'm not talking about generic beauty. I mean, a presence that unbalances, that unsettles, that commands respect. Because true attractiveness isn't about pleasing, it's about disturbing, not by choice, but simply by existing authentically. And that, for many, is unbearable. The first sign is the easiest to ignore, but also the most revealing. Men get nervous around you, and you assume it's because there's something wrong with you. You might think it's your voice, your manner, your clothes, your presence. But what if it's exactly the opposite? What if it's because you confront them with something they don't know how to handle? Look, when a man is with someone ordinary, he relaxes. Predictability is comfortable. But in the presence of a woman who is fully present, even without saying a word, something stirs inside him. A slight discomfort, as if he's being seen too much, perceived too much, touched without contact. He laughs louder, avoids direct eye contact, stutters, or he shuts down, changes the subject, tries to appear disinterested, and you interpret it as rejection. But in reality, his body is revealing what his mind is trying to hide. You've moved him out of his comfort zone. Sartre called this the look of the other, when we realize we're seen not as objects, but as presence. And that can be unbearable for someone who lives hiding behind masks. You're not wrong. You're alive, authentic, and that scares them. His insecurity is a reflection of your strength. But if you're trapped in your own bad faith, this habit of hiding behind what others have said you are, you won't see what's happening. You'll shrink to fit. You'll stay silent, not to disturb. But today, I invite you to do the opposite, to recognize. Their nervousness isn't about you being inadequate. It's about you being too much for the script they rehearsed. You are an improvisation in their routine, a reminder that something lies beyond control, and that is profoundly attractive, because it is profoundly free. The second sign may seem contradictory. Sometimes you feel men treat you with a strange mixture of interest and hostility. One day they compliment you, the next they ignore you. Sometimes they're tender, but soon afterwards they jab you with irony or try to belittle your opinions. This confuses you. It makes you doubt yourself, but what's really at stake is something deeper. It's the impact of your authentic existence on someone still trapped in their own bad faith. Sartre said that another's freedom threatens us, because it reminds us of our own. And when you act spontaneously, when you speak truthfully, when you don't mold yourself to please, you force the men around you to confront their own performance. You're not just a woman, you're a mirror that reflects their image back without filters, without illusion. And what happens when someone sees themselves unvarnished? They either try to destroy the mirror, or they distance themselves from it. That's why you provoke contradictory reactions. Some will feel drawn to you and yet want to control you. Others will desire you but attempt to disqualify you. Because desiring someone free is a threat to someone still imprisoned by themselves. This tension, this mix of anger and fascination, is a clear sign that your presence has weight. You're not light in the sense of being superficial. You're light because you refuse masks, and that is far too heavy for someone who only knows how to relate through roles. You've seen it happen. Men who seem to want you but make awkward jokes about your body, your intelligence, or your interests. They don't know how to deal with the fact that you don't fit in any box, that you can't be easily defined. So they oscillate, and you experience that oscillation as rejection. But it's not rejection. It's clumsy admiration. It's the conflict between what they feel and what they can admit. Here's the key. Don't take it personally. See it as a sign. Other people's discomfort in front of you is proof that you're being genuine. And truth, as we know, is never neutral. It divides. It reveals. It unsettles. If you provoke contradictory reactions, it's because you don't fit easy labels, because you allow yourself to be a work in progress, free, mutable, unpredictable. And that is deeply seductive, even if they don't know how to handle it. The question is, will you shrink to ease their discomfort, or will you uphold the weight of your freedom? Because being attractive at heart isn't about seduction. It's about existing with intensity. And that for many is unbearable. But for others, it's irresistible. The third sign is the quietest of all, and for that reason, the most powerful. They look at you when they think you're not looking. You're there, distracted, maybe talking with someone or simply silent, and suddenly you feel that invisible weight, as if a gaze is glued to you. When you turn your head, he's already looking away, pretending to check his phone, or pretend to be lost in thought. But you felt it. The hidden glance is desire without courage. It's the will that hasn't yet allowed itself to become verb. And contrary to what it seems, that gesture isn't about shyness. It reveals that, before your presence, something was awakened that he still doesn't know how to name. For Sartre, the look of the other transforms us. We cease to be purely consciousness and become object for the other. When he secretly watches you, he is turning you into something that fascinates him, but that he doesn't yet dare to approach. This man is being affected by you. Your presence invades his territory without permission, and that disarms him, because what he sees in you isn't just a face or a body. It's intensity, a vibration, a presence that calls, that stirs him. And here is the most important point. You don't have to do anything for this to happen. No effort, no seduction, no performance. You simply have to be. And that, for some women, is hard to accept because they've been taught to believe they're only seen when they do something to be seen. But that is a cruel lie. The truth is that you are perceived even in silence, even in the pause, even in the tiniest gesture, because your existence has depth. It echoes. You enter a room and something changes. You don't speak, but you're felt. You don't impose yourself, but you occupy space. The problem is that if you're unaware of this, you can interpret those glances as accidents, as if they aren't about you, as if they weren't real, but they are. It's the world revealing something you haven't yet accepted in yourself. And here freedom comes in. Either you keep pretending you don't notice, or you start living with the awareness that you're being seen, that you have impact, that your presence alters the atmosphere, not out of vanity, but out of truth, because the hidden look of the other doesn't lie. It slips out of control. It reveals. And the question remains, are you willing to embrace what your silence already shouts? The fourth sign can be especially painful because it comes disguised as criticism, irony, or disdain. And that makes it one of the hardest to interpret correctly. Men try to diminish you in conversation. They correct irrelevant details of what you say. They disqualify your opinion with jokes. They try to explain to you what you already know. Or they simply ignore what you say as if it were background noise. You might even laugh it off, pretend not to care. But inside, something trembles, and you wonder, am I stupid, weak, boring? But what if it isn't that? What if the attack is actually a reflection of your strength? Look, when a woman enters a space carrying authenticity, she upends the balance of the game. She's not there to compete. She's there to be herself. And that unnerves people, because most social interactions are based on power plays, and when someone escapes those plays, others try to bring her back to the board. Sartre teaches us that bad faith is the attempt to flee from our freedom, and when you appear with freedom in your gaze, in your posture, in your ideas, you threaten those who live hiding behind roles, masks, characters. So they react. They try to clip your wings with words. They try to reduce you to something they can control, a stereotype, a caricature, a label. Because if you can be boxed, If you fit into a category, you no longer scare them. But what they say says more about them than about you. A man who feels small in front of an authentic woman has two choices: grow or attack. And many choose to attack. Because growing demands effort. It demands confronting one's own cowardice. And you, on the other side, start doubting your light. You begin to prune yourself to fit. You start to soften your edges, to hide. But the more you hide, the more you betray yourself. The point here isn't to be accepted by everyone. It's to uphold your existence even in the face of rejection. To recognize that their disdain isn't proof of your inferiority but of your impact. When they try to belittle you, it's not because you're small. It's because, to them, you're too big. And the question remains, will you shrink yourself to fit into the eyes of those who refuse to see? The fifth sign is so subtle that often you don't even notice it. And when you do, you may think it's kindness, coincidence, or mere politeness. But it isn't. Men offer to help you all the time, spontaneously without your asking. Whether carrying a high bag, solving a technical problem, offering explanations nobody requested, or even insisting on saving you from minor situations. This might seem simply chivalry or social habit, but in many cases, it's a direct reaction to how your presence affects them. When a man feels he's in front of someone who emanates value, even if that person hasn't recognized it in herself, he's drawn into a mode of care, attention, and attempts to please. Not because you need it, but because he feels something in you, calls him to be available. That spontaneous help is a silent confession. It's as if he's saying, I don't know what this is that you have, but I want to be part of it somehow. But there's something even deeper here. When Sartre speaks of project and situation, he reminds us that each of us carries a way of being, a manner of acting in the world that transcends mere appearance. And your project, perhaps without you realizing it, is that of someone who refuses to play the victim. You walk with an inner strength that, though silent, is perceptible, and that is exactly what provokes movement in the other. The man feels your presence as something to be protected, accessed, respected, even if he can't explain why. This kind of help isn't about fragility, it's about impact. And curiously, often the more insecure you feel inside, the more this help appears outside, as if the world itself were trying to show you what you can't yet see. The question isn't whether you need help, it's why. Do others feel the need to offer it to you? There's an invisible field around you, a presence that organizes others' attitudes without effort, without noise, without asking, and denying that in the name of humility is falling into the trap of bad faith, that subtle way of hiding from your own power. You don't need to blame yourself for it, nor feel superior. You just need to ask, why do you still refuse to acknowledge the impact you have? Because sometimes the world already sees you, but you're still trying to disappear. The sixth sign, say, is one of the hardest to accept, because it doesn't come as praise or explicit desire. It comes as veiled rejection, inexplicable distance, tension in the air. You unsettle without doing anything. You walk into a room, and some people look away. Others change their tone of voice. Men who once spoke fluently begin to choose their words. You notice judging glances, cutting remarks, an agitation that seems to have no cause. But it does. Your presence destabilizes. Not because you're aggressive, but because you're real, authentic. And authenticity is a threat to those who live in performance. Sartre said that the being in itself simply is, whereas the being for itself is what knows itself in construction. When you appear as being for itself, aware of your complexity, your freedom, your contradictions, you break the silent contract many made with superficiality. You're not there to play the classic seduction game, nor to fit into the mold of the docile, predictable, domesticated woman. You're there being yourself, whole, intense, contradictory, and that throws others off balance, especially men. The discomfort you create is actually a reflection of the anguish your freedom awakens in them. Because by existing authentically, you show that it's possible not to submit, and that forces them to face their own submission, to culture, to sexism, to fears, to roles. You're the reminder that there is an exit, but an exit that demands responsibility, and most prefer to keep sleeping. So don't be fooled by cold smiles, strange silences, sudden withdrawals. Sometimes the greatest compliment you'll receive is a nameless discomfort, a withdrawal without explanation, a loaded silence. You did nothing, and yet it's impossible to ignore you. The question remains, are you willing to sustain that discomfort? To accept that being remarkable isn't always being welcome? Because attractiveness, on that existential level, isn't about provoking desire. It's about provoking existence, and that not everyone can handle. The seventh sign is simple, but absolutely revealing. And perhaps you've never paused to notice it with the attention it deserves. Busy men always make time for you. We live in an era where everyone seems to be running, too busy, overloaded. Excuses come automatically. I didn't have time. Life is crazy. We'll talk later. But when you enter the equation, something shifts. Suddenly, he replies faster, cancels commitments, extends his schedule, invents reasons to be where you are. This isn't just interest. It's prioritization. And behind it lies something much deeper. Freedom in action. Sartre said we're condemned to be free. That means every act is a choice, including the acts we pretend not to control. When a man alters his routine to get closer to you, he's making a choice. He's transcending his own inertia. He's, even if unconsciously, admitting that you're part of a project more important than everything else. And what does that reveal about you? It reveals that your presence is a rupture, a turning point, something that calls attention as subtly as it is inevitable. You're not asking, you're not begging, you're not chasing. And even so, he reorganizes himself around the possibility of seeing you, hearing you, being near you. But there's a cruel detail here. Often, out of insecurity, you ignore this. You think he's just being polite, that it's a coincidence, that he acts this way with everyone. And once again, you deny your own impact. Because admitting that someone is changing their steps for your sake requires courage. It demands breaking the self-image of someone who only receives crumbs. And here enters your responsibility, not to reciprocate his interest, but to recognize the truth of what's happening, to stop pretending it's not about you, because it is, and it always was. When a man makes time for you, he's saying with gestures what he may not be able to say with words. You force me to be present. You interrupt my life's automatic programming. The question is, can you sustain that kind of presence? Or do you still need to hide behind the idea that you don't deserve that kind of attention? Because real attractiveness isn't about demanding attention by force. It's about being so connected to yourself that the world reorganizes around you, without you having to raise your voice. The eighth sign escapes superficial perception, but leaps out at the alert eye. Perhaps you've noticed and ignored, or perhaps you've never paid attention, but it's there, repeatedly. Men begin to mimic your way of speaking, your tastes, your words. You say an expression, and days later, he repeats it. You mention a band, and he turns up listening to it. You share an idea, and soon he starts using it in conversation as if it were his own. At first, it may seem coincidental. It may even sound like a trivial bonding attempt. But in reality, it's a much deeper phenomenon. You've become a reference. Sartre spoke of consciousness as something that projects itself, launching out into the world in search of meaning. And when a man starts absorbing your manners, your phrases, your tastes, it's because he's, even unconsciously, projecting himself toward what you represent. This is more than admiration. It's transformation. He begins to reconfigure his own way of being in the world around your presence. But why does this happen? Because when you are authentic, not performative, not strategically seductive, but alive through truth, you become a model of freedom. You show, through your gestures and language, that it's possible to exist with integrity. And that is magnetic. It's almost educational. He observes you not to copy, but because somehow he senses you are closer to truth than he is. Imitation, in this case, isn't artificial. It's a silent acknowledgement that you represent something valuable, something to be learned, something to be absorbed. And yet, perhaps you still tell yourself you have nothing special, that you're not interesting, that you're just being yourself. But that just is everything. Because being you, without hiding, is the most radical act in a world where everyone is playing a role. So the next time you notice someone repeating your words, your mannerisms, your musical tastes, or your arguments, don't be startled. It's not appropriation. It's reverence. Even if unconscious, it's the other saying, with subtle actions, "You've marked me." And the question that arises is, why do you still doubt yourself when the world has already begun to become a copy of you? The ninth sign hides at the periphery of contact. It doesn't appear in conversation, nor in overt flirting. It resides in distance, a distance filled with presence. Men avoid direct contact with you, yet observe you from afar. You enter a room, and he notices, but he doesn't come up to you, doesn't start a conversation, doesn't approach. Instead, he positions himself where he can see you, and he watches, sometimes for seconds, sometimes for minutes. You feel it. The field shifts. The energy grows heavy. But when you turn to look, he's already diverted his gaze. This behavior isn't indifference. It's emotional overload. He's trying to handle something he feels, but doesn't know how to name, and above all, doesn't know how to control. For Sartre, desire is an attempt to possess the other's freedom. To desire someone is, in a way, to try to reduce them to an object. But that's impossible when the other radiates freedom, when she's irreducible. And that's exactly what you represent. Your presence cannot be contained. You are not offered as a product, as a mask, as a passive figure. You are alive, full of nuances, full of presences, and that vitality is frightening. So he watches from afar, like someone witnessing a fire, fascinated, terrified, attracted, frozen. It's easier to observe from a distance than to risk contact, because contact requires surrender, risk, presence. And facing you demands a type of presence he may not yet be able to sustain. The problem is that if you're accustomed to insecurity, you may interpret that distance as disinterest, and you shrink, thinking, he doesn't even notice I exist. But he did. He's trying not to notice, and failing, because you displace, you break the autopilot. You demand a response, even when you stay silent. This man may never say anything, may never approach, but your existence has already affected him. You've become a reference. You're in his memory, in his imagination, in the tension he feels and doesn't understand. And that, as invisible as it seems, is a kind of presence few can sustain. The question is, do you need explicit validation, or can you trust the power you emanate even in what remains unspoken? Because being profoundly attractive is that, leaving traces, even without leaving footprints. The 10th sign doesn't come in words, but in what happens right after them. Men go silent after you speak. Not that hollow silence of disinterest or inattention, but a dense, weighted silence, sometimes even uncomfortable. You say something, a sentence, a question, an apparently simple observation, and instead of an immediate response, there's a void, a pause. At first you may think you said something wrong, that you were annoying, that you overdid it. But in truth, that silence is the sound of impact. It's his mind trying to recalculate the course. Sartre reminds us that the being for itself is in constant construction, and every authentic contact with the other forces them to reconsider who they are. And that's exactly what you do when you speak truthfully. You pierce the veneer of superficial conversation and confront the other with themselves. It's not the technical content of what you say, it's the intensity with which you exist while saying it. The steady gaze, the pause in mid-sentence, the absence of hurry, the absence of mask. This kind of speech is rare, because it demands that you be present in yourself. And when you are present in yourself, you compel the other to be present too, even if only for an instant. And that can be uncomfortable. Men accustomed to dominating conversations, to using discourse as armor, don't know what to do when they encounter a woman who isn't seeking approval, who isn't trying to fit in, who speaks as someone who's already understood that the world isn't a stage, but nonetheless chose to dance. So they fall silent, not out of disinterest, but out of lack of defenses. And here's the point. You need to stop interpreting that silence as rejection. Start hearing it for what it is, a sign that you struck something, a structure, a fear, a desire, a doubt. You are an experience, not a performance, and true experiences often leave us speechless. The challenge is to sustain that presence, not rushing to fill the silence, not apologizing for being too intense, because that silence, however uncomfortable, is sacred. It's the moment the other begins to see you, and maybe also begins to see themselves. The 11th sign is perhaps the most disguised. It arrives shrouded in humor, disdain, or jest. But once you learn to listen deeply, it screams. Men compliment you in strange ways, with caveats or ironies. You hear things like, "You're pretty, but you know," in that different way, or "Too smart to be fun," or "You're dangerous, huh?" There's always a comma, an addendum, a crooked smile, a tension hiding behind the phrase. These aren't sincere compliments. They're attempts to cope with the discomfort your presence creates, because you defy norms, because you can't be labeled, and above all, because you make them feel something they can't control. Sartre said, "We are condemned to freedom," and the other, when faced with a woman who allows herself to be free, is forced out of their own comfort zone. That generates two impulses, admiration and defense. The caveated compliment is the result of this conflict. He wants to get closer, but fears losing control. So he domesticates his admiration with a dash of irony. He tries to turn fascination into a joke, because that makes it easier to deal with the fact that he's in front of someone he can't classify. And the most tragic thing is that often you absorb these remarks as truths. You think you're not really that beautiful, that you're strange, too intense, too rational, too exaggerated. You begin to doubt your worth based on the words of someone who couldn't handle your presence. But here's an invitation. Reinterpret those awkward compliments. See them as embarrassed confessions. He's not mocking you. He's trying to protect himself because you displace him. You force him to feel. And feeling, for many men, remains hostile territory. You are dangerous, yes, but in the best sense. Dangerous to apathy, to games, to performances. You threaten what is false. And that, for many, is unbearable. The question is, will you keep adjusting to receive more pleasant compliments? Or will you accept that your intensity will never be comfortable, but will always be memorable? Because being complimented with caveats is a sign that you touch what really matters. The 12th sign is the most paradoxical of all, and perhaps the most important, because it doesn't concern what others see, but what you still refuse to see. You don't feel you are all that, and yet you continue to be noticed. You enter a room and feel the glances. You receive messages, compliments, invitations. Men try to approach you, even if in confused or disguised ways. But inside, part of you insists on denying, "It can't be because of me. It must be a coincidence. They must just be needy." This refusal is the final and deepest sign. Sartre said, "Bad faith is the effort of consciousness to flee from the truth about itself." And what could be more terrifying than acknowledging that you are indeed desirable, that your presence has impact, that you have power? Because accepting that would demand responsibility. The responsibility to stop hiding, to stop sabotaging yourself, to stop begging for validation from people already touched by you, even if they never admit it. You insist on seeing yourself as insecure, ordinary, invisible. But reality continues to contradict you. The glances keep coming. Conversations shift tone when you arrive. Silences deepen. Others feel you, even if you still doubt. And this is precisely where the choice occurs. Will you keep denying what the world has already perceived? Will you continue diminishing yourself in the name of an old idea about who you are? Or will you dare to rewrite the narrative? True attractiveness is not a mirror. It's a field. It's not measured in inches, curves, or compliments. It's perceived in the effect you cause, even without trying, even without wanting to. You don't need to convince yourself with affirmation phrases in the mirror. You need instead to confront the fear of owning who you are. Because once you accept your own strength, there are no more excuses, only choices. You're not a possibility. You're already happening, and the world is reacting. The question is, are you ready to do the same? Because as Sartre would say, you are what you make of what was done to you. And perhaps what they did was try to erase you. But now it's your turn to ignite, to occupy, to exist, not halfway, but fully. And now, perhaps for the first time in a long while, you're hearing something that isn't a superficial compliment or a disguised criticism, but a realization, a truth the world has tried to show you in averted glances, strange silences, contradictory reactions. You are profoundly attractive, and the only reason you still doubt it is because being seen is frightening. Being seen forces you to exist whole, without excuses, without hiding. Sartre teaches us there is no essence before existence. That means you weren't born with a fixed label, neither beautiful, nor invisible, nor insecure. You build with every act the woman you are, and perhaps, without realizing, you've already built something intense, powerful, uncontrollable, and that's why so many men oscillate around you, why they watch you in silence, why they react without knowing why. You've become freedom in the form of a body, and that isn't easily digested. It's felt, it's lived, it's avoided, and sought at the same time. Today you heard 13 signs, but deep down, they all say the same thing. You are already affecting the world around you. The question is, will you keep running from that? Because every time you doubt your presence, you're saying no to your own freedom. You're refusing to be the project in motion that you already are. So here's the invitation. Stop measuring yourself by others' rulers. Begin to see yourself as a field, not a display. Notice not what they say, but what they do, what they can't hide, what you provoke even when you try to disappear. And if you want to take the first step toward this new narrative, write in the comments, I allow myself to be seen. But only write it if you're ready. Ready to assume the responsibility of being you, with no concessions, no apologies. Because living authentically is perhaps the most seductive act there is, and no one can do it for you.